In this lecture, we're going to toggle the audio with the player. First, we're going to move the audio player into a separate component. Open the app component file in your editor. In the template block, search for the player. Above it, there's a comment that says player to make it easier to find. It would be a good idea to put the player into a separate component. Let's do that now. Inside the Components directory, create a new file called player.view. Scaffold the template and script blocks. Set the name property in the component to player. We'll move the HTML from the app component to the newly created component. In the app component, cut the player template. Then, we'll paste it into the player component's template block. This component will need to be registered. We'll handle that next. Back in the app component, import the player component. The name of the component object is called app player. We're using the app prefix to prevent name collisions. In the app component, we'll add the app player to the list of components in the component property. With the component registered, let's load it in the area where we previously removed it. We'll switch to the browser to check if the player still loads. As expected, it does. Great! We can begin to toggle the song both audibly and visibly. The icon in the play button will need to change depending on if the song is playing or not. We're using Font Awesome to create the icons. There's a pause icon that we can use. To tackle this, we're going to create a function that will toggle the audio controlled by Howler. Howler makes the process very easy. We're going to create the function in the store because the Howler object is stored in the state. Anything that affects the state should be defined as an action function. Let's go back to our editors. Inside the store file, define an asynchronous action function called toggle audio. At the moment, we're not entirely sure if Howler is even ready. If there is no Howl object, we can't toggle the audio. Initially, our app will load the sound property as an empty object. It will be a good idea to check if the object is a Howl object or a plain empty object. Inside the action, create a conditional statement that'll check if the sound.playing property returns false. The condition we're using is checking if a function called playing is defined in the object. It's a function that's available on the Howl object. We're checking if the function exists. If it does, we know there's an existing Howl object. Otherwise, we're going to return the function because there isn't an audio file to toggle. After the conditional statement, it's safe to assume the sound state property is a Howl object. We can toggle the audio. First, we need to know if the audio is playing. By knowing that, we will be able to pause or play the audio properly. Create a conditional statement that calls the playing function. We have two conditional statements that are similar. The difference between them is that in the second conditional statement, we're invoking the playing function. We're omitting the parentheses in the first conditional statement. This will mean the playing function doesn't get invoked. JavaScript will see this as us checking if the function exists on the object. The playing function, when called, will check if the audio is playing. It'll return a Boolean value. If this returns true, we'll pause the audio. Inside the conditional block, call the function sound.pause. If you're curious about the available functions on the Howl object, they can be found on Howler's documentation. Each instance comes with the functions we're using. As you would suspect, the pause function will pause the audio. If the music's already paused, we'll want to play it. Create an else block where the play function will be called. The action function is ready. Let's map it to the player component so that we can call it when the play pause button is clicked. In the player component file, import the map actions function from the Pinia module. Next, import the player store. We'll create the methods object. Inside of it, we'll call the map actions function with the spread operator. We want to map the toggle audio function. We want the function to be called when the play button is clicked. In the template block, search for the button. It'll be under a comment that says Play Pause button. Attach the click event with the prevent modifier. The method we'll call if it's clicked is the toggle audio function. Let's give things a test. Play any song you want. After a few seconds, you should be able to pause or play the audio by pressing the play button on the player. The icon doesn't correctly update. We'll fix that soon, but first, make sure the audio is pausing when you press the button. Once you've confirmed that, let's move on to updating the icon. The icon in the button will be based on if the audio is playing or paused. We can use the playing function to help us out with that. Here's what we'll do. We'll create a getter function that will return the value returned by the playing function. A getter function is perfect because we'll be able to use it in any component in the application. Go back to the store file in your editor. First, we must add the getters object for storing our getter functions. Inside it, we'll add a getter function called playing. Getter functions are provided the state object as the first parameter. We'll accept it because we want to call the playing function on the sound state property. Before we call the playing function, we want to check if it exists. Create a conditional statement that checks if the state.sound.playing function is defined. If it is, return the value returned by the function. If the function isn't defined, it's safe to assume that there isn't audio playing. After the conditional statement, we can return false. The next thing we'll do is map the getter function to the player component. We won't be able to call it if it isn't mapped. Switch to the player component file. In the script block, add the map state function to the import statement. As a reminder, the map state function can map state properties and getter functions. Despite the name, it's not exclusive to state properties. Getters are the equivalent of computed properties for the state. Create the computed object in the component. Inside the object, we'll call the map getters function inside of it with the spread operator. Map the playing getter function. After mapping the function, it can be used to update the icon. In the template block, go back to the button we added the event listener to. Inside of the button will be an icon. We're using Font Awesome to create the icon. If we want to change the icon, we'll need to bind the class attribute on the element. We're binding the attribute because we want the classes to be dynamic. Dynamic classes can be added by using object syntax. At the moment, the FAPlay class is statically loaded into the class attribute. Remove it from the class attribute and move it over to our binding as a property. The value for this property will be the playing getter function. We want to check if the function returns false. If it is false, then the audio is paused. The play icon should be displayed to indicate that the audio can be played. The next icon we'll want to add is the pause icon. The name of the class for the pause icon in Font Awesome is called FAPause. The value for this will be the playing function, but this time we want to check if it returns true. If it returns true, then we want to display a pause icon to let the user know they can pause the audio. Switch back to the browser to test if the icon toggles correctly. By creating a getter function, we can update the UI accordingly. The second half of the player is the progress bar. We'll work on this in the next lecture.